I didn't realize what was happening because I was a child. Discomfort, pain, anguish, and fear. What happened to me, I will never forget. Children don't really understand things. They think the world works according to rules adults understand or according to the orders they give us. But the truth is, if I could have run away, I would have. But now, looking back, I can say with absolute certainty, he knew my parents' routine better than I did. I grew up in a small town where people didn't lock their doors until something gave them a reason. My parents had just separated, and for a while, I lived with my grandparents in this quiet house at the edge of a neighborhood that felt more like a collection of long driveways than a real street. My dad worked in a nearby city, so I only saw him on weekends. My uncle lived with us too, drifting between jobs, always around in the afternoons, always gone at night. I was rarely alone, and that's why it took me so long to notice the pattern. His name was Marcus, or at least that's what everyone called him. He wasn't family, but he might as well have been the way he moved through our lives, helping my grandfather fix things, hauling wood, showing up at barbecues with a case of beer, laughing too loud, calling everyone buddy, like it meant something. He was one of those people adults describe as a little rough around the edges, but harmless. The kind of man who makes you uncomfortable for reasons you can't articulate, so you shame yourself for feeling it. When you're a kid, known adult automatically equals safe. The first time he showed up when the house was empty, I was young enough that I wasn't even in kindergarten yet. My grandmother had gone out, my grandfather had left to pick her up, and my uncle was supposed to be back soon. I remember the quiet after the truck pulled away, like the house exhaled and held it. I remember cartoons on the TV. I remember being told the way you tell kids things that are supposed to stick. Don't open the door for strangers. The knock came fast, confident, like it belonged. I ran to the door because kids run to doors. I asked who it was because that's what I'd been taught. And I heard his voice on the other side, warm and familiar. He was smiling. "Hey, it's Marcus. I just missed your grandpa. Can you open up?" My first thought wasn't fear. It was pride. I knew what to do. I knew the rule. I told him my grandparents weren't home. I told him my uncle wasn't there either. I expected him to say okay and leave, but he didn't. Instead, he said something that should have made my stomach drop even then. "Yeah, I know. I saw your grandpa pull out. Your grandma's at bingo, right?" It wasn't a question. It was a fact. I hesitated, hand on the doorknob. I remember staring at the deadbolt like it was a puzzle, because the rule said stranger, and he wasn't a stranger. He was a neighbor. He was a friend. He was someone my family trusted. "I just need to use the phone," he said. "Real quick, I'll stand right in the kitchen. You can keep watching your cartoons." And I believed him, because adults always act like rules have exceptions, and kids learn quickly that the exception is usually do what the adult says. I unlocked the door. He stepped inside, and the air changed. Not in a magical way, just in the way a room feels smaller when someone fills it. He smelled like old beer and cigarette smoke, even though he wasn't holding either. He looked down at me and smiled, but his eyes didn't match it. "Good kid," he said, and put his hand on my shoulder. He was steering me. I didn't like it, but I also didn't know I was allowed to not like it. He kept saying small things that sounded normal if you weren't listening too closely. How school was going, I was getting. How my grandparents were lucky to have me. But he didn't pick up the phone. He didn't even look for it. He just stood there, turning his head like he was checking the angles of the house. He was mapping where the rooms were and how quickly someone could move through them. And then he asked, lightly. It was casual. It didn't matter at all. "So your grandpa's gone for a bit, huh? You know how long he'll be?" I shrugged. "Not long." He nodded, like he was filing it away. "And your uncle's out too?" Another nod. "And you're here by yourself?" I didn't answer that. I just remember feeling the urge to step back, like my body was trying to create distance my mind couldn't explain. The sound that saved me was the one I didn't expect. The crunch of tires on gravel. My grandfather coming back earlier than he said. Or maybe he'd forgotten something. I'll never know. All I know is Marcus heard it before I did. His head snapped toward the window. The hand on my shoulder tightened, then released. "Don't say anything weird," he murmured, too close to my ear, like a secret. And then he moved fast, out of the kitchen, toward the back door, slipping out like he'd done it before. My grandfather walked in a moment later, keys in hand, and his face changed when he saw my expression. "What's wrong?" he asked. I told him Marcus had come in. My grandfather frowned, confused, and called out his name like it was a normal thing. No answer. He checked the back door, then the yard. "Probably just stopped by," he said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. He asked me why I opened the door, and I said the sentence that still makes me feel sick when I remember it. "He's not a stranger." My grandfather stared at me for a long time, like he wanted to rewind time and put a different lesson in my mouth. Then, he told me I did the right thing. He told me I was safe. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't call the police. He didn't even mention it again that night. And that should have been the end. It wasn't. After that, Marcus started appearing in these little accidents that didn't look like accidents at all once you added them up. Always when my grandparents were out. Always when my uncle had stepped away. Always when the house was quiet. Sometimes he'd show up with an excuse so harmless it felt ridiculous to question. He found something of my grandfather's near the shed. He needed to borrow a tool. He just wanted to drop off leftover food from a cookout. He'd knock, and if I didn't answer, he'd knock again, softer, like patience. And if I answered through the door, he'd always say some version of the same thing. "I know you're in there. I can hear the TV." And once, when I didn't respond at all, he laughed and said he was teasing. "You're a smart one. Your grandma taught you good." It should have sounded like praise. It sounded like a threat. I never told anyone the details because I didn't have the language for it. I didn't know how to explain the way he looked at the windows before he looked at me, or how he always seemed to know exactly how much time he had, or how his friendliness felt like something worn over a sharper shape underneath. And my family didn't ask the right questions. They heard Marcus stopped by and treated it like weather, annoying but normal. No one wanted to be the person who said out loud, "Maybe we shouldn't trust him," because that kind of sentence changes everything after. It forces decisions. It creates conflict. And in small towns, conflict is treated like a worse disease than danger. Years passed. I got older. I started staying at my mom's more often. Marcus drifted in and out of the neighborhood like a bad habit. I saw him at gatherings. He'd wink at me sometimes, not in a playful way, in a way that felt like he was reminding me of something I couldn't quite remember. And then my grandfather died. After the funeral, I sat with my grandmother at the kitchen table, the same table where Marcus had stood that first day, pretending he needed the phone. We talked about memories, about grief, about how the house felt too big now. I mentioned casually it was just another story from childhood. Do you remember that night Marcus came over when you weren't home? My grandmother's hands stopped moving. The spoon in her tea went still. Don't, she said. Just one word, sharp, like a door closing. I stared at her. What? She swallowed, looked at the window, then back at me, and for the first time in my life, I saw fear in her face that had nothing to do with ghosts or storms or sickness. It was the fear of consequences, of saying the wrong thing, of opening something that had been sealed shut on purpose. Your grandpa handled it, she said quietly. Handled what? I asked. He just told me not to open the door. My grandmother's eyes glistened, and she shook her head like she was trying to shake the past off her shoulders. You don't understand, she whispered. You were too little. I leaned forward. Then explain it. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked me something I hadn't thought about in years. Do you remember why your grandpa went out that night? She said. To pick you up, I said. She nodded slowly, then said, and before that? I frowned. Before that? My grandmother stared at her tea like it held the shape of the truth. Your grandpa went out earlier, she said. For a bit. Hunting, I guessed, because in our family, that was always the excuse that made time disappear. She flinched. Yes, she said, but the way she said it was wrong. Too rehearsed, too thin. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Why are you asking me that? My grandmother finally looked at me and said the sentence that rewired my entire memory of my childhood. Because he didn't go hunting. Not really. I didn't breathe. I waited for her to keep talking. She didn't want to. You could see it. Every instinct in her body screaming to retreat into denial, to protect the story she'd told herself for decades. But grief does strange things. Sometimes it loosens the locks you didn't realize were there. After that night, she said, voice trembling, your grandpa started keeping track of when you were alone, she whispered, of when I was out, of when your uncle was gone, of when your father was in town, of when Marcus would show up. My throat felt tight. How would he know? My grandmother's eyes filled. Because Marcus wasn't guessing, she said. He was watching. He was listening. He was planning. I tried to tell myself she was exaggerating, that grief was turning a creepy memory into a monster. But then she stood up and opened a drawer I hadn't noticed before. She pulled out an old spiral notebook, the kind you buy for school. The cover faded and bent. She placed it in front of me like it weighed 100 pounds. Inside were dates, times, notes in my grandfather's handwriting, short, clipped observations written like he didn't want to waste ink on fear. Monday, bingo night. Marcus drove by twice. Tuesday, uncle out. Marcus knocked at 8:14, left at 8:17. Friday, Marcus waited in truck until I pulled out. Sunday, church. He watched the house, and on one page, underlined so hard the pen tore the paper, he asked about the child. He asked when she's alone. I stared at the notebook until the words blurred. Why didn't you call the police? I whispered, not even sure who I was asking. My grandmother, my grandfather, the entire room. My grandmother's mouth tightened. We thought about it, she said, but in this town, people talk. And Marcus, she swallowed. Marcus had friends, people who didn't ask questions, people who preferred simple explanation. So you did nothing, I said, and I hated how my voice sounded, like a judge, like a stranger. My grandmother's eyes flashed with something that wasn't just sadness. It was anger. Maybe at herself, maybe at me, maybe at the world. Your grandpa did something, she said. He warned him. How? She didn't answer directly. She looked away and said, after that night, Marcus stopped coming inside. That was all she would give me. But it was enough, because suddenly I understood the real pattern, the one I'd been too young to see. Marcus didn't stop because he got better. He stopped because someone forced him to. And my grandfather, he didn't call the police because he didn't trust the system to protect a little girl in a town that protected its own comfort first. He didn't report it because reporting would mean letting strangers decide what counted as danger. So he did what people like him do when they feel cornered. He took it into his own hands and made sure the threat understood. There was a line, the part that haunted me. Wasn't even the notebook. It was what my grandmother said next, softly. It was the most painful truth of all. You want to know the worst part? She asked. I nodded, barely. She took a shaky breath. The worst part is that when we started telling people to keep him away, they acted like we were the problem. They said your grandpa was being dramatic. They said Marcus was just lonely. They said maybe you'd misunderstood. I felt my eyes burn. I was a child. I know, she whispered, but it was easier for them to believe you were confused than to believe someone they knew was capable of something ugly. And that's when it clicked. The ending of the story wasn't a chase scene or a court case. It wasn't justice with a neat ribbon tied around it. The ending was a room full of adults choosing not to see. Marcus had always been the obvious danger, the stranger disguised as a familiar face, the smile that didn't reach the eyes, the knocks that came exactly when the house went quiet. But the deeper danger was the silence that surrounded him, the way everyone treated suspicion like rudeness, the way he's always been nice to me became a shield that protected him more than it protected the child in the house. That night, when I was little, I thought the scary part was unlocking the door. Now I know the scary part was everything that happened after. How easily the truth was packed away, how quickly people returned to pretending, how long it took for anyone to admit what they already felt in their gut. Because Marcus didn't need to break in, he just needed time. And he had plenty of it, as long as the adults around me kept choosing comfort over clarity. So if you take anything from this, let it be this. Trust isn't a title someone earns because they're known. Trust is behavior, patterns, respect for boundaries. And if someone only shows up when the adults are gone, if they always seem to know the exact moments the house is unguarded, don't explain it away as coincidence. Someone who waits for the schedule isn't being friendly. They're being patient. And the most dangerous thing you can give a patient predator is a community that refuses to look.